Hey everyone, welcome to Wiki's fantasy preview for round one of the NRL in 2023. So I'm going to start doing regular videos every single Wednesday for fantasy, which hopefully will go for about half an hour, and also for punting, which will come out tomorrow. So that's Thursday around lunchtime, Sydney time. So going through the fantasy stuff for round one is a little bit tricky. I thought I'd cover off firstly teams for round one. So if we go all the way to the top here, we've got the Eels and the Storm to begin the round and the season, 8 p.m. Sydney time, Thursday, the 2nd of March. We've also created like a spreadsheet with all the teams, all the expected minutes for the forwards. So I'll go through that, not in too much detail. I don't want to bore everyone, but go through that. I'll then go through footystatistics.com, created by a guy on the NRL Fantasy Fanatics Forum. Amazing resource if you're into your NRL fantasy. To be honest, even if you're into your Supercoach, it's a really good way to search up players. Like for example, I was just doing Adam Duahi earlier today, thinking about, well, I've got him in my fantasy team, but probably haven't done enough research to figure out why. And then I was playing around with his 2022 numbers and realized that he was averaging 50 in about 70 minutes. And then I realized, well, let's have a look at games that he sort of played close to a full game, and bang, that takes him to 56. And then I think I did halves. Nope, maybe not. 5/8. And then, yeah, that takes him to 62. So really nifty website, really cool tool. But we'll play around with a little bit of that later. Have a really quick look at Supercoach as well. And Draftstars, who we actually work with. They've got a $50,000 contest. This is where you can put some money in for fantasy teams and $50,000 up for grabs for just the one game tomorrow. So you can make a fantasy team just for one game. Similar principles to Supercoach, NRL Fantasy, where you make a team, find out who the better value players are, and you can see, wow, okay, first prize almost $5,000 tomorrow. So that should be cool. So I'll run through all of that stuff. And for Draftstars, if you are interested, we've got a link for you to sign up. And we've also got our stats Bible. So what we do is if you are interested, you can look at tomorrow night's contest, the 50K contest. We've got all the players, how much they cost, what we project them to score. So we've got a statistical model that looks at, lines and totals, who are they playing, what ground is it at, each player's historical form, each, obviously the team and the opposition, all that kind of stuff. We break it down, make it really simple for you. Obviously fans of the Cardi Party would be happy. He's the best value player in tomorrow night's contest, and also figure out ceiling range, which I'll get into later. But anyways, guys, let me get started. So first up, as I said, Parramatta Eels and Storm. The season starts off in Sydney with the Eels, obviously losing the grand final last year, coming up against the Storm. Both teams are missing quite a few players from last season. So in breakdown, I'll go into the spreadsheet here. So generally, I do need to clean this up, and we'll share a link to this tomorrow. But basically, if you look at the guys in yellow, they're guys that have taken up a spot that's made empty in that squad, or guys that might be in their short term. So Simonson potentially only going to be there short term. Warbrick has taken up Iramea's spot because the ACL. And then we've got Olam, getting the other one, Olam and Seve to come back in the centers for the Storm. So young talent player may not hold on to that spot for long. Obviously, Felice Kafusi and Kenny Bromwich missing this year, gone to the Dolphins, and these guys have replaced them for now. I'll get into this probably in our article as well, but I reckon Katoa, slightly better pick given his upside. We saw what he can do a couple of seasons ago for the Warriors. They're a really good player as well. But with Tariq Sims to come back in, one of these guys might only get 50, 60 minutes, with Sims playing a little bit of edge, a little bit of middle in that hybrid type of role. Their bench is really interesting. They've got Grant, Lewis, McDonald, Wishart. I don't see any of these guys sort of playing big minutes in the middle. So if you are playing Draftstars, or maybe if you're playing, if you're sort of looking at the waiver wire and you draft, Josh King might be an interesting pickup just for those first few early rounds when they're really stuffed for players in the middle. Aside from that, Nas is a really interesting one. Like, yeah, he's going to get more minutes, and he was really good in sort of, he was noticeably better in fantasy and Supercoach last year. I just don't know about Nas and his ability to sort of like play that 60-minute role. I just don't see Bellamy using him like that, but really interesting one. Harry Grant is an interesting one as well. Like I assume like a lot of other people went, Brandon Smith's gone, Harry Grant, got to pick him in Supercoach. He's going to be value. And then I played around with with his minutes from last year. So looking at Harry Grant here, you got a season 2022. He actually played 76 minutes on average. So I was really surprised by that. So I thought there would be some upside in Grant. Like he played one game off the bench around Origin, that's fine. Played one game in the halves, maybe it was two where he played sort of part of the game in the halves. Whatever. Most of the season he played the hooker and he played pretty much close to averaging 80 minutes. And honestly, because of that, I took him out of my team because there's a whole bunch of other guys from Team List Tuesday that have been kind of opened up as really good value options. And even if you look at their sort of extended bench, it's not like they're hiding an experienced NRL player there. Like Anderson's a winger. Don't know too much about these other guys, but Kami Kamika, he's out for the first 5 or so weeks. So going to be really interesting to have a look at that middle, especially now with Kafusi, Kenny Bromwich, Jesse Bromwich, and Brandon Smith out of that pack. On the other side, we've got the Eels. Obviously, they're playing at home, which is great. Although you'll see here a lot of yellow in their back row. So that was Lane, Ice Papali, and either Nathan Brown, or I think Nathan Brown might have started, or maybe it was Nia Corey. I forgot about him actually. And also, obviously, Ryan Madison off the bench. A lot of sort of forward pack minutes missing. RCG and Paulo are still there, which is great. I don't know if they're necessarily going to get too much beyond that sort of 50 to 55 minutes that I've got him in for. Hopgood, obviously everyone's high on him for fantasy. I think you just don't think too much, you just get him. Simon might only be there for 1 week with Sean Russell, who I believe is suspended. So I'd be really wary, even if you are considering him for fantasy or Supercoach. Red, by the way, is the goal kickers. So Moses, Meany for this game, most likely, well, almost definitely. Hodgson is an interesting one. He could, I don't know why I've got him in for 60 minutes actually. To be fair, that could actually be close to 80. I don't see who else would take up hooker minutes for him. So yeah, Hodgson, I know he's coming off injury, but I reckon he'll get sort of like close to a full game. I have no idea how he's going to manage that. Or potentially the coach might decide to bring in Jacob Arthur last minute into the team. And I just don't see how, for someone like Weremu Greg, I don't know too much about him, but I think it might be better for them to sort of bring in Arthur there, back up for the halves, or potentially the centers, and also maybe just 15 minutes at hooker, just to give Hodgson a break, his first game after a long time. And obviously we know the Storms round 1 record, I think it's like 20 years or whatever that they haven't lost for in round 1 or close to that. All right, let's get on to fantasy and Supercoach. I think I might just go through towards the end. So I'll go through just like game by game first up. So second game for the round, Warriors and Knights. This should be relatively quick. Warriors, we've got nothing too exciting in the backs, to be honest. In terms of season long players, there's Fanua Blake. Not Fanua Blake. Barnett, Ford, Niokore, Harris, Curran. That's 5 players that could potentially play at some point in the second row. So I have heard that a few people are excited about Jackson Ford because he is relatively cheap in fantasy and I think Supercoach as well. I've got him in for 40 minutes and put that in because I just don't know. I don't see how he gets 60 to 80 minutes. Like just with the way that I've got it organized at the moment, that adds up to 490. Obviously, that's slightly above the 480 minutes that the pack is going to get. I don't see anyone here that I've got for more minutes than they should be. Like Tohu Harris obviously plays big minutes in the middle. Barnett, I've got for 55 because I think he'll play some time on the edge. Curran, I know he's coming back from injury and that's why he's on the bench. But again, he was a really good player for the Warriors last year. And Walker did a really good job in the middle for Manly last year. And a forward at 30 minutes. He's been a good player for the Warriors for a long period of time. So I would pretty much stay away from everyone in that Warriors pack. I don't see any reason why you would pick them in Supercoach or Classic. There's a couple of guys that would be decent pickups for draft. And we'll sort of go into more detail on our sort of social media and stuff in terms of Draftstars picks and who might be a good pick according to their price. And even in the backs, I think CNK is a decent purchase in overall. He's priced pretty well. Fantasy and Supercoach, I wouldn't really talk anyone out of him. TMM is priced pretty well on NRL Fantasy. So again, decent pick there. Johnson, I don't think too many people are excited about him this season. And I think that's pretty fair enough. With the Knights, I think Lachlan Miller, I've talked myself out of him in NRL Fantasy. I think he'll definitely rack up some stats. I think the Knights will go sort of reasonably well this year. I don't think they'll make the 8, but I don't think they'll sort of be in the top, the bottom 2 or 3 either. So I think Lockie Miller, if he's the only guy that you can kind of afford when you filled out most of your team in NRL Fantasy, I think that's okay. I wouldn't sort of actively go and pick him as your sort of second winger fullback though. The yellow spots, so that's Gagai's spot. Gagai should be back in a week or 2, I think. But regardless, he's not there now. Tuala's got that spot short term. I wouldn't consider him. Hymel Hunt is priced really well in fantasy, and I think Supercoach as well. Most likely, Dom Young keeps his spot on the right wing, which I assume, or Tuala's taking Gagai's spot, so he'd also be on the right. That leaves Best and Hunt on Ponga's on Ponga's favorite left edge. So for that reason, I've actually got Hunt starting for me because they're up against the Warriors this week. I've actually got Hymel Hunt starting for me in the winger fullback in NRL Fantasy, and I've also got him in Supercoach, I think, starting as well. I think if he's on the left edge, I don't see Dom Young switching sides. So Hymel Hunt, I think, could be a really good pickup, and you hope that he kind of holds on to that spot. He's clearly won it of a great margin, so that'll be really cool. That'll be a slight pod to keep an eye out for. Hastings, it's said that he was most likely going to be goal kicking. I'm actually pretty high on him, and I've actually got him in my NRL fantasy team at the moment. I think I think he'll take ownership of this team. I think Ponga is a great player, and he does have leadership abilities, but I don't think it's kind of the sort of older voice in the team just yet, even though I'm pretty sure he's the captain. So I think Hastings will take on that role. I think he'll do really well. I don't see him sort of going up in price massively in NRL fantasy. I think he's averaging in price at mid-40s. I think he could take that up sort of over 50, and it'll just be a really fun player to have in your team for the first sort of like 5 to 10 rounds, see how he goes, and worst case scenario, trade him after making a little bit of cash. Look, this pack, it's got Clemmer missing, and someone else from the middle that I'm missing at the moment, but they've got a couple of players missing, and I think Dan Safidi will definitely have to step up this year in terms of minutes and also productivity. He's just priced awkwardly, so I'm not going to really recommend him or Jacob from a fantasy perspective. I'm going to do a separate video for punting, and I'll definitely talk about these two guys. They're usually pretty good value in try score markets. Adam Elliott, he's on the bench at the moment. He's coming back from injury. That'll only be sort of like a week or two, and I think he'll be in good shape to be the starting lock real soon. But I think he's one to sort of stay away from, watch how he goes, and maybe gets a couple of 20, 30-minute games if he's really struggling from injury, and he sort of leaks some money, and he could be a really good buy in a couple of weeks. But aside from that, not too much to talk about with the Knights. Going into the next game, the Friday night game, this should be an absolute cracker. So the Panthers are obviously missing a couple of players from last season. They've lost, let's go, Coruscant. They've lost Kickow. And I'm missing one here, the winger, Taylor May. And I think there's someone else here, but essentially missing a few players. Whereas the Broncos, they started really, really hot last year and obviously fell away at the end of the year, but that squad has a lot of potential. So you got Reynolds to add some class, Mams a live wire, Cobbo can be a star, Staggs had some really good games against Penrith, and Carrigan, obviously, Wally Lewis medal winner last year, and Flegler and Tapau on the bench. That's some decent sort of firepower off the bench as well. Going into their squad, I think, I've got Cobbo and Arthurs in yellow because Reece Walsh should be back in a week or two, which then pushes Cobbo back into that side. So if you were looking at Arthurs for your season-long teams for no reason, don't. Reynolds goal kicking, Cleary, no surprises there. In terms of the pack, from an overall point of view, love Haas. I think he had like a slightly down last year stats-wise. If you want him in your fantasy or super coach, would not talk you out of him. I think he's a great pick. Carrigan, really, well, everyone knows he had a great season last year. Stats-wise, I think he did really well. But I think similar to Haas, I don't see any downside. I think they're both slight value. They are both going to play Origin, though. So it's like, if you have both of them, you've got two middle forwards that hopefully will be guns. But again, they're going to have their buys at the same time. They're going to be missing a lot of weeks due to Origin as well. Yeah, I think you couldn't pick both, but I shouldn't have brought this up. If you had to pick one, oh, I would look at what site you're on, Fantasy or Supercoach. Look at their ownership percentages. If you're not sure which way to lean, I just go whichever one's sort of less owned on that platform. I know it sounds a bit silly, but I think they're both great picks. That's the Broncos. Panthers, obviously Taruva fills in for May. He's got that spot locked in. He's a really good price on Supercoach. Not so much for fantasy. I wouldn't pick him in fantasy, but I definitely would in Supercoach. Um, Forward pack, Garner in for Kickout. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. If you really want him, pick him. But there's just so much value, like a lot of cheapies and a lot of value edge back rollers, especially. You got Garner, Katoa, Liero. I wouldn't pick Dury, but there's Cartwright, Hopgood. Like there's just if you're just in this sort of like 6 teams, there's a lot of value in the back row. I'm personally going to be staying away from Garner almost definitely. I just think with the potential that A, he's in a new team, B, Hosking is sniffing around. I just think like I'd rather go a cheaper guy or just a cheapie like a rookie rather than go Garner at that awkward price. We've got guys like Wilton, Egan, Butcher. There's just so many players. I'd rather just go a cheaper edge back rower guy because I don't think Garner's going to go. He's not going to be a gun. Like he might sort of. I think just have a quick look at him actually. He in NRL Fantasy, there you go. His price sort of like around 34. Season, if I go 2022, second row, and just the games that he sort of had like a decent hit out, 44. So, he's sort of like priced roughly 10 points below what you'd expect him to score in the sort of like early to mid 40s. So, which is why I don't think he's a bad pick. Definitely wouldn't talk anyone out of picking him. Although I just also kind of think that there's a lot of value. There's a lot of players that are sort of slightly cheaper, but I think that instead. Next game on the Saturday. So this is when we get into the daytime games. 3 p.m. Tom Trbojevic back. Bulldogs rolling out, kick out, Marnie. It is going to be a really, really fun game to watch. Going into this game, there's not too much I could say in terms of the result of this game. Like Tom Turbo playing at home, daytime, like he's just going to be really fun to watch. Although he's not going to be sort of fully confident with his body, obviously coming back from injury. The Dogs pack has just been obliterated. If I scroll across a little bit here, the Dogs pack, you've got King, Sutton, and that's kind of it. Farmani Brown used to be a half, played some hooker the last year or two, and now he's been named at lock. Waddell obviously has played a few seasons, nothing special to be sort of pretty blunt. And then you got rookies like Pele, Tanner, and Preston. King and Sutton are going to have to play potentially even more minutes than the 55 that I've got them listed for, and B, going to have to be really, really good in the middle. Marnie will probably end up playing 80 minutes just because they're so short in terms of the middle of the field, but I've got him in for 70 in Clay's Farm, Marnie Brown. Gives him a spell if Marnie hasn't had too much of a preseason. In terms of their squad, I know Matt Burton, he was super popular early in the preseason. Apparently didn't do a lot in the trial, and people sort of making decisions based off that. I've actually also taken him out of my fantasy and Supercoach teams, but that's more so just because I'm so sort of in favor of Duehi. I think if you have the budget for Burton, you want to pick him. I don't see anything wrong with him. Like he had a significantly better. I'll quickly go into Burton. He had a significantly better second half of the season, as most NRL fans would know. Like he started off, look at that, like NRL fantasy scores sort of like around the 30-40 range for a lot of the first 10 rounds. And then he kind of really hit a purple patch around the origin period. Obviously, it took him a couple of months to get used to playing with that Doggies team. And then he really took ownership, started scoring some tries, a lot of kick meters, which is awesome in NRL fantasy. Ended the season kind of quietly as well, as the Doggies kind of didn't do so well as a team too. But that is a really good purple patch, and you can see that average of 50. You could probably guess that he averaged around that 55 mark, or maybe even 60 after the first couple of months of the season. So I think there's definitely upside there, because the Dogs they've now even got Kiko and Marnie, so they've improved even more. So I think don't make your decision based off a trial. If you can afford him and you do want him, I'd definitely be picking Burden. And the Dogs as a team as well, like they were, I think about 12th or 13th, maybe from memory, maybe 13th to 14th last year. I could see them sort of like around that sort of 7th to 10th spot. So they're going to improve. Burden's got, another off season with the Doggies. I'm almost talking myself into it, to be honest, but yeah, definitely a good pick. Aside from that, I think if you're sort of like, especially with draft, if King and Sutter are available, I'd pick pick them up off the waiver wire if they are available. RFM, I would think about. Definitely if he's on the waiver wire, but definitely pick him up. Fantasy and Supercoach, he's kind of priced awkwardly. There is Thompson, unfortunately, is pretty much ruled out for the season, according to Gus Gould, which is really, really sad. TPJ's around. He should be back in around round 4 or 5. Again, according to Gus. Gus and NRL Physio, the two guys helping us out with expected return dates. But yeah, that's the Doggies. Seagulls, again, like a pack that's kind of odd, to be honest. Like they've got Jake Trebojevic, who will play close to 80 minutes, you'd think. But then they've got Paseka, Kepi, Aloi, who I can't see playing much more than 40 minutes. Like one or two of them might play slightly above that, but they're definitely not going to be playing more than 50. So you've got Trebojevic and a whole bunch of sort of like guys that don't play big minutes. So I think Kepi is priced really well in Fantasy and Supercoach. Even though he's named at lock, I don't think that means he's suddenly going to start playing 60 plus minutes. But he's priced so well that even if he does consistently get 40 minutes instead of the sort of like 25 or 30 or so that I'd say that he was playing a lot of the times last year, I think he's a great pickup. Really good cheapie. Got him in both my team, Supercoach and Fantasy. Aside from that, who do they have? They've got a couple of guys out. So they've got Sipley to come back. They've got Schuster to come back. Well, Schuster would obviously go into the halves most likely, but Sipley will come into that forward pack. Another guy who probably plays that sort of 35-ish minutes. He'll probably replace someone like a Ben Trebojevic, which would beef up their pack a little bit. Just quickly on a punting point of view, Bullimore, if you find him at a good price, he's a really good try scorer, so look out for him. And if he does get that starting, I don't see it, but if he does get that starting second row spot because of an injury, and if he's if he's pretty much priced as a cheapie, and if he's got sort of 4 or 5 weeks, he's definitely one I'd look at after his bye. That could be a really interesting one to look out for. Aside from that, if you've got DC in draft or any of the comps really, you know what you're going to get from him. So I wouldn't talk anyone out of them. So that's the Dogs. Eels Dogs. I think we're almost halfway. So Cowboys Raiders. I'll go through this game and I'll start going through some of the other stuff in a bit more. Oh, actually, you know what? I'll go through the games all in a row, make it easier, and then we'll go through Fantasy, Supercoach, and Draftstars. So the video will be a lot easier to follow. It's my first time sort of properly doing this, so it's going to be a little bit out of whack, but I'll get the hang of it. This game's actually been really fun to watch. So the Cowboys, obviously, I think it was 3rd. They ended up last season. Raiders ended up 8th, won their first final from memory, and just looked really good when Fogarty came into the team halfway through the season. Tapine went an absolute all-time career best run, and he continued that in the World Cup. Whereas the Cowboys have barely had any changes to their squad and just looked really good all year. I was shocked when they lost to the Eels, to be honest. I was really high on the Cowboys. Whereas the Raiders, they're missing CNK and Savage. They've lost both their fullbacks from last year. They've had to move Chris, one of their centers. I'll go on to this actually. They've had to move Chris from the centers into the fullback position. HSS, Smith Shields. I've got him as a good cheapie, and I've actually got him in my fantasy and my Supercoach team because I reckon he gets the best part of the 8 weeks or so that Savage is likely to miss in the centers. He's coming off a long-term injury, so you'd want to taper your expectations, but I still like him as a pick, and I've got him in my teams. Solo, I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. Be really wary. Ricky Stewart does do this. He's obviously in Josh Papali's spot. Papali should only be out hopefully for a week or two. But I would think here, Tapine, I've got him in for 60 minutes with Papa missing. He'll play big minutes at least for this week. So between Tapine, CHN, Forsberg, and Gula, they'll get that sort of 40 to 60 minutes in the middle each kind of role. And then Solo and Mariota will get 20 to 30 at most, I would say. And then Starling and Levi to obviously share the hooking role. There's actually pretty decent forward pack, just oddly structured. They're really missing Parley, and you can kind of see that. And in terms of the backs, as I said, Smith Shields, yep, pick him up in classic fantasy or Supercoach if you want to. Wouldn't recommend anyone else out of their backs in terms of your season-long teams, but for draft, I think Fogarty could be a really interesting pick, and Wyden, you know what you're going to get with him. For the Cowboys, as I said, not too many changes. You know, Holmes. Well, actually, one thing that the Supercoach, who was it? I think Wilfred from the Supercoach podcast, they've been going on about how good this Cowboys draw is. I've heard them talk about it all preseasons. I actually haven't seen it, but I'm going to trust them that they do have a soft draw over the first few weeks. Therefore, I think I've got Holmes in my Supercoach team from memory. Definitely wouldn't talk anyone out of him. Drinkwater, I know a couple of people are going with. I think with Tedesco, Turbo, Latrell, Ponga, there's a lot of options. I'm personally staying away from Drinkwater and Supercoach, but again, soft draw, you know, a really good team, pretty much the same team or very similar team to last season. I think Drinkwater or Holmes, you know, if you want to go one of those for your Supercoach team, I think that's definitely fine. I think it would be good fun watching the Cowboys early in the season. In terms of their pack, as I've got Cohen Hess there in yellow, that's because Luciano Leilua and someone else, Lukey. Leilua and Lukey, they're both missing for a couple of different reasons, but regardless, they're not going to be there for at least the first 5-ish weeks. So Hess has that spot. He's available at front row forward in Supercoach, and I had him in my team. I still might have him in my team. I like him as a front row forward option in Supercoach with the upside of being an edge back rower for a really good team with a pretty soft draw early on. So I think he's an interesting option for Supercoach, not so much for fantasy. Taumalolo down year stats wise from what I saw. So I think he could potentially be a really interesting draft option. I've got a couple of drafts that I had with two sets of friends, and I think I picked up Taumalolo in one of them, knowing that he should have a slight improvement stats wise. And obviously he'll be really dependable in the origin period when a lot of the sort of main guns are out. Nothing too interesting to note with McLean. Robson was great last year. I think he'll just continue. Cotter, I think there's slight upside, but he has had a pretty bad record with injury. He started playing really well last year, did his hammy for a few weeks, was great in Origin, but sort of just like was not quite the same, I think, after that injury. So I think there is definitely upside in Cotter, and I think he could definitely be a gun. I'm personally just staying away just from him missing a few weeks. And I think, yeah, especially like fantasy could be a good pick, but Supercoach just doesn't quite have that upside. It's not a big sort of try scorer in the middle or anything like that. But that's it. Yep, that's it for the Cowboys and the Raiders. Next up, Saturday night. This should be a ripper game. I think if I'm remembering this right, I think I went to the final at whatever the hell Allianz Stadium is called now. But yeah, the Sharks and the Rabbitohs should be a really good game. Unfortunately, obviously the Nico Hines is out. That news is all over sort of every single NRL news source. If you've missed that, well, your team's probably in trouble. But Braden Trindle, I think for draft, he's a really good sort of 1 or 2 week pickup if you do play draft. I'll speak about Draftstars later, but definitely someone I'd be looking at there. Hines, the tricky thing about him, definitely wouldn't be picking Hines. Way too much money for a player that's not playing in round 1, and they've got to buy around round 5 or 6 from memory. So I'd be sort of really wary of that. Trindle, he's priced really well in both fantasy and Supercoach. Supercoach, you obviously don't get price rises until like round 3. So I wouldn't look at him in Supercoach. I'm considering for fantasy, if you're just not happy with any of the other cheapies, you know that when he's playing, he's gets a lot of stats. And also he does well with his goal kicking. For anyone considering, if you trust the rumors that Hines could be out for a few weeks, and you want to look at Trindle, let's look at his 2022 stats in games that he played most of the game. We've only got 4 games to go off, which sucks, but an average of 34. I think he actually has scored better than that in the past, which I'll double check. But even if it was 34 from a small sample size, that's 20 above his price. And obviously you could make some quick cash if he plays sort of 3, 4, 5 weeks if you think Hines is going to be out for a while. That's what I was referring to. There you go. 2021, obviously the stats were all higher in 2021, a lot of the attacking stats, sorry. But there you go, 52 in 80 minutes as a half across what looks like the best part of about 10 games. And you can see that upside as well. Like obviously he's got a few tries here, but NRL Fantasy scoring 87 with 2 tries, and then 49 a couple of times with a try each. And then yeah, there you go. 70 with no tries. That's pretty impressive. A lot of goals in that as well. And just to check if he's got okay, not too much to go off. But yeah, generally I'd expect him to score average sort of like around 40 or so over 4 or 5 weeks. He's priced at bloody like 15 or 17 or whatever. So if you do think Hines will be out for a while, he'd be a good one to sort of at least. And the thing is, when you've got him in NRL Fantasy, at least you can play him. So you can be a 4th reserve instead of like a Dury or someone who doesn't have that much upside. So I'm almost talking myself into Trindle. If you're not happy with how many the cheapies that you do have, if you're going to pick like a bench forward that's going to get 20, 25 minutes, there's no upside there. So, it might be worth considering a Trindle instead of someone like that. Elsewhere, Rudolph, Finnecane, McInnes, maybe Graham, probably get the bulk of their middle minutes. Nothing too exciting there. Jack Williams, Royce Hunt, I think will be back in a week or two. So he'll probably sort of take Jack Williams' spot. The big one probably here is Wilton. I've heard some pretty good analysis on the NRL Fantasy Fanatics forum that we've been on for the best part of a decade. Really good resource for NRL Fantasy and just NRL news, full stop. Wilton, I'm going to be staying away from him again because of how many cheapies we've got after Team List Tuesday. Reason why I am staying away from him. So 2022, for example, you go over 60 minutes games in 2022, and then he averages 50 in 75 minutes. That's awesome because he's obviously priced at like 37, 38, more than 10 points, and he kind of, I wouldn't say becomes a gun, but he becomes a really good pick. The thing that's stopping me is that if you look at sort of games under, let's just say over 40 minutes and under 70, he averages like 34 in 54 minutes. Let me see if this helps. Yeah, so if he's going to average like potentially like 35 to 40, that's what he's priced at. I just realized. But if he's going to be averaging sort of like 40 to maybe say even 45, even if Wade Graham takes 10 to 20 minutes of him every second game, right? Like if he's sort of averaging 70 minutes, I reckon that's a score in the early 40s. And you're sort of spending 536K in NRL Fantasy for a player that is probably going to get you like 5 more points maybe that he's priced at. Like you pretty much want him to be playing 80 minutes for sure. And if you think Graham will not play any edge, then yeah, Wilson is a good pick in both Fantasy and Supercoach. If you think they don't have a bench utility, Brayley does usually play 80 minutes. And if you think, there's just too many quality players, and most likely Graham maybe gets 20 minutes in the middle and maybe 10, 15 on the edge, or maybe 20 minutes on the edge every second week if Wilton's gassed or if they're winning well, I'd be staying away. And personally, I am staying away from Wilton. So he's a no-go for me. Aside from that, a couple of decent options for your draft team. Like I know Rami and Talakai, there's not a lot of options in NRL Fantasy draft. Both the drafts that I did were in Fantasy. And they were pretty good pickups. For whatever reason, if any of these 4 are available on the waiver wire, I pick them up. Like the Sharks are generally a pretty good team, and like the wingers tend to score pretty well. They're both quite hardworking. Rabbitohs, Latrell Mitchell played really well once he came back from the US and sort of did his rehab and stuff last year. In Supercoach, it's pretty much him and Tedesco. You could go Latrell thinking, I don't have to touch him. Pick him and just keep him for the first 12 or 13 rounds or whatever it is till Origin. Nothing against that at all. He's a superstar. It'd be really fun to obviously have a new team as well. Whereas with Teddy, you're going to pick him for 2 weeks and then he's going to have a bye. And then it's just an awkward spot. So Teddy's got 2 soft games. I'm personally going him. But if you want to go Latrell, I just pick him. He's a gun. Don't have to think about that one fullback spot, hopefully for 13 weeks. Fair enough. People are obviously, everyone loves Damien Cook, good bloke, New South Wales hooker. all that kind of stuff. I haven't picked him in any of my teams. I just don't think there's any upside. Like he's going to get 80 minutes, but he always has gotten 80 minutes. Yeah, I think he's fine. Nothing wrong with him, but I just sort of actively wouldn't be picking him over over other guns. It's always a case of like if you're not happy with Grant, you're not happy with a couple of the others, sure, you can go. And if you're not happy going like a Brandon Smith at hooker and super coach with a Tanner Boyd or some sort of combination like that, if you actually want to spend big on your hookers, then yeah, fair enough. Cool. There's nothing wrong with him. In terms of the pack, we've got, well, it's honestly like pretty much the same pack they've had for the last couple of seasons. I don't see anything sort of special here. Cam Murray, another one, just like Latrell, super dependable, had a standout season last year. And I don't see, he did play really well, but I think it's just a case of him sort of like 5-6 years into his NRL career, just stepping up. And I think he can kind of like maintain that standard. So he's essentially a gun that you can just keep in your team like Latrell until about round 13, whenever Origin is, and you just don't have to touch it. And he's obviously a lot more consistent than Latrell as well. So I think he's a great pick for fantasy and Supercoach. I think I've just brought him into one of the two. I think it's a really good pick. This bench, Blake Taff, Moale, and Mitchell, can't see any of them playing over 30 minutes. Even Cheekham I've got as 40, but that's just 40 because of what's around him. So I expect Totola, Burgess, and Murray to play sort of these guys 50 to 55 minutes, Murray 70 to 80, depending on if it's a close game, because they just have to. You know, with no Hamesele, with no Havili, Knight's gone for quite a bit of the season. And unfortunately, Host wasn't named. I'm not too sure what's wrong with him, but yeah, the guys that are there in this pack are going to have to play big minutes because they're up against the Sharkies. It's a huge game, and there's just these guys are decent. They're not going to say they're bad NRL players or anything, but they're just not going to be able to play 40 minutes in the NRL in the middle of the field. Next up, we've got the Dolphins and the Roosters. Look, I've heard a few people, I think it was Kronk and someone else for Fox Sports that said they might end up around 10th or 11th, I heard. I personally thought this will almost not quite be Roosters up against a reserve grade team, but I personally think it's going to be sort of 24 points or more to the Roosters in terms of winning margin. They've got no Joey Manu and they've got no Waria Hargraves and obviously no Crichton and no Watson. I think those are the four sort of big misses for the Roosters. Although they've got Suwali, Teddy, Tupou, Kiri Walker, Brandon Smith, who's obviously new to the club, the Butcher brothers, who are both hyped up as fantasy and super coach prospects, Radley, like the list goes on. And then I think with the problem with the Dolphins is that obviously their first ever game together. The problem isn't so much like who are they've got a rookie in the halves, they've got guys with like a couple of guys with decent reputations, but no one sort of amazing in the back line. A decent forward pack to be sort of really honest with them. To be honest, sorry, but there's just no standout. And I think it's going to be really hard. Like you see this in international footy. This is actually I just made this up on the spot, but it's actually a pretty good example. Like when you look at international footy and like the way that some teams look really good, especially like the Samoa and Tonga in the last few years, they look really good on paper. You're like, holy shit, like these guys have some really gun forwards, but they just don't quite gel, like especially in the earlier games in the tournament. And you look at that spine, Tabuai Fido, Katoa, who's a rookie. Tabuai-Fido's probably only played like 1 or 2 seasons of full NRL. Sullivan's only played, I'm going to say about 10, 15 games of sort of full-time NRL. And then JMK, who's probably only become a decent hooker in the last season or two. That is not a great spine. And I think they've got some decent experience in the pack, which is really good. That'll could be good for their culture and the young guys coming through. But yeah, I think they're going to struggle, unfortunately. I know Tabuai-Fidow is really popular in both fantasy and Supercoach. I'm staying away. A fullback for a team with low work rate, for a team that I think will struggle, just not. I think it's a great opportunity to essentially leave someone out or fade someone who's got higher ownership percentage. Who else do they have? Katoa, he's in the same boat, but he's just so cheap that it's almost worth just having him in there at 230k in NRL Fantasy and whatever the cheapest price is, sorry, in Supercoach. So I think it's fine to have him there, but if you've got other people that you want, I'd be going them. Like I just think that Katoa, yes, he's going to get some kick meters and some tackles, and obviously, like you'd want him running the ball, and that's great. He's just not going to get a lot of attacking opportunities, and the fact that the tackles and kick meters that he gets is probably going to be negated by a lot of missed tackles, to be really honest. So if you can, I'd stay away from him. But if you need him just to fill out your team, that's fair enough. No one that I'd really consider here. Tom Gilbert could be an interest. Oh, sorry, Ray Stone. He's very cheap. I think 257k in NRL Fantasy. I'm going to stay away from him most likely in Supercoach just because there's limited upside in picking like a slow burn middle forward like Stone, even though he's really cheap. Whereas in Fantasy, I'm all over him. 257k. I'm really excited. Really happy with that pick. And I think throughout the season, like it might take him sort of like a couple of months to make you that 8 to 10 rounds to make you money. But I think given their pack, especially if there's an injury or two, he could get that sort of 40 to 50 minutes in the middle of the field, average like 30 to 35 fantasy points. And that's all you need because I think he's priced at about 15 to 20 or yeah, around 15 to 20 at the moment. Moving on to the Roosters, a couple of interesting points. Obviously, Walker. So I think it's pretty interesting. So I think Walker and Tedesco, there's been a couple of people that said that have brought up the point of you could pick someone like a Tedesco and or Walker in your fantasy or your super coach lineups. Have them in for the first 3 weeks because the Roosters have their bye around 4 and the Panthers have their bye around 3. So instead of picking Cleary from the offset, you go Tedesco and or Walker, knowing that you're going to be able to sort of trade down one of them and then trade up to Cleary. It's yeah, for the people who are used to playing fantasy Supercoach for a long time, really value their trades. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but I think there's some really interesting strategies you can have this year with the buys, and one that I'll definitely be looking at. I think I've got Teddy in both fantasy and Supercoach, and I intend to do that with Cleary probably in fantasy. Elsewhere, you've got Suwali. I don't think he's awkwardly priced. He'd be an awesome draft pickup because I know in NRL Fantasy he's now dual position. I think he'd be a really good draft pickup. I've got him in one of my 2 draft teams. The Butcher brothers. Now, Angus Crichton, I really don't want to talk about this because it's really hard to tell what's going on with him. And obviously I'm not a Jono. So, but look, he's at least going to be out for a few weeks based on all the sort of talk in the media. If that's the case, I think Egan Butcher is definitely worth considering, given that he's like a stats beast. Nat Butcher, I actually had him in my team for the last couple of weeks and took him out just because I realized that he's awkwardly priced, and I don't think he's going to go too much higher in terms of his value. Like he'll definitely go up in value. You probably have a game the first couple of weeks where he goes nuts, but you've got Butcher, like Nat and Egan. You've got Brandon Smith that's obviously super popular. Walker is a super coach option. Teddy's an option in both comps. That's like 4 or 5 Roosters that people are going to be considering, and then they have the buy in round 4. So personally, I think I'm staying away. They're both reasonable picks. Not saying you shouldn't pick them, but I think I'm going to stay away from both the Butcher brothers. Pick Brandon Smith. Pick Teddy. And I think Sam Walker in Supercoach potentially from memory. But regardless, like you need to make your mind up on how many Roosters you want, knowing that they have a buy in round 4. That's all I'll say there. And Joey Manu should be back in a week or 2. So Corey Allen, obviously, just be wary of him. Would not be picking him, and even Paulo, I'd be wary given Momorowski's sort of around the squad. And apparently Paulo did have the best trial game, so just be wary there. Going on to, there you go, last game. Tigers Titans. So this is going to be fun. Both teams obviously didn't do very well last year. Both teams have had a couple of new signings and reason for hope, pretty much. Tigers, the home team, we'll go through them first. Staines comes in because Momalo is injured for a few weeks. Talau's priced really cheap in NRL Fantasy. I've got him in my team just because I think he's got a history of poor scores, but I'm going to back him in this Tigers outfit. Still all right. Start seeing him make a little bit of cash. The big talking point, Dewey, kicking goals. I went through at the start like how good he is in games that he sort of plays the whole game in the halves, especially when he gets a few weeks of form when he's not injured and he's sort of not out of the squad or not playing in the centers, etc. So I've got Dwayne in both fantasy and Supercoach. Love him as a player. The Tigers are on the up. I think he's a great pick. Utekamaru is an interesting one. You've got Clemmer, Offangawe, Twal, Bolle even played really well last year. I can see him getting sort of 35 to 40 minutes. And then you've got Bateman to come in and even to play like Seyfarth, who did reasonably well last year. There's just a lot of experienced players that could play big middle minutes. And I think realistically, Stefano probably only gets that 30 to 35 minutes, maybe builds up to 35 to 40. So I think he's an okay pick if you don't have anyone else. I'd rather go with Kepi just because he's cheaper. And I think Utokumano he had really good try scoring stats in 2021. And I've got faith in him doing really well. I just think he's awkwardly priced where you could just go get a cheapie instead. But if you've got the money and you want to reach up to him and you sort of like I'd have him as like one of my last picks. If you have a Kepi and you've actually got 100 grand to play with or whatever it is, sure, go to Kamino. He definitely has more upside. I get that, but I wouldn't be locking him into your team early, personally. Blore, I've got him yellow because I think there's a few different rumors about what's going on with Bateman. Is it like the just come back from the UK and he's jet lagged or sort of not seasoned for the NRL? Is it an injury that's playing up? Is it 1 week? Is it a few weeks? Are they taking it easy on him? Whatever. We don't know for sure. Let's just say Bateman is back in the team round 3 and he plays a couple of weeks with sort of like less minutes than usual. It's probably going to be like 3 to 4 weeks of Blore getting a decent crack in the NRL. And I just don't think that's enough. Like, I think there's other players that are sort of have better job security, and I'd probably go there instead. So I'd stay away from Blore. And I don't think anyone else is attractive, to be honest, in that Tigers team from a fantasy or super coach point of view. For draft, I think Laurie, he could be on the waiver wire and up against the Titans in round 1. He'd be one that, like, if you're really struggling, you win the fullbacks for sort of NRL fantasy draft, I'd look at him for sure. If you haven't already, have a look at Nofaluma. He's been there for close to a decade now. I think he had some time at the Storm last year or the year before. Like, he deserves a good Tiger season. He's really good in terms of run meters and tackle break. And if they do improve, it might take them 4 or 5 weeks to sort of like click into gear with everyone playing together and the new players like Coruscant and Papali having an impact, Bateman coming to the team. But I reckon like their backs, especially Nofaluma, is one to watch out on it. And if you find that maybe in draft someone drops him and he's on the waiver wire, 100% I'd be looking at him. Titans, Khan Pereira, got to be yellow because obviously got that wing spot at the moment that Maju, I think, used to have from every last year. There's Brian Kelly that's sort of, I think, a few weeks away. Herbert, I think he's out for a bit longer. I forgot, but there's someone else missing here that could come back. So I think he's another one where his job security is a bit dodgy. But if you don't have anyone else and you just want a cheapie, I think he should get at least 2 or 3 weeks and it's okay to put him in. But if you can try to leave him out in NRL fantasy because there's a lot more edge back rollers or whatever that you think are good value and are pretty cheap, I'd rather go them. Shop, Foreign, and Verrills, they're imports, which I think will have decent impact. They've always had like reasonable outside backs without having anyone sort of super sort of like first class, I think, in their back line. So I think like these 4 guys aren't going to have a huge impact on their season. I think it's, can Brimson consistently play well at fullback? Can Boyd step up? Boyd's going to be next to his buddy David Fafita. Can they actually strike a combination and sort of, can he get Fafita on the ball more often? Can Tino show the form that he did the last few weeks? I saw some stats on him that I didn't realize, to be honest, about how he was playing at the end of last season. So he's sort of, again, NRL fantasy around that sort of 52, 53 mark. And then you look at the last handful of games last year, 5 games, he got moved to prop and he went bang. No tries in that. So no sort of like, sort of fluky stats in there for a middle forward, but 60, 49, 75, 77, 62, averaging, like around 30, early 30s in tackles and sort of late 100s, almost 200 run meters. Like that is that's beast mode. That's a really good buy, Tino. So I reckon if you're sort of not 100% sure on the other options with the middle forward, I think it'd be a nice pod to chuck into your fantasy or relative pod for your fantasy and super coach teams. Don't feed out, just lock him in. Get on the roller coaster, bring him into your team. He's got huge upside. I know actually it'll be worth having a look. I've locked him in my team just because I love guys with high potential. He was already averaging 50 odd, early 50s in fantasy, and he didn't have a great season. But if I look at his stats last year and just look at your minutes, like the big game minutes, assuming he's sort of not injured and he's going to be playing most of the game, 55. Oh, not as much upside as I thought. Well, then you're kind of just hoping that he's 4.5 missed tackle. Also, he's why was I so high on him? Let me have a look at the season before. There you go, 63. That was the year that everyone had good stats, 2021 though. Let's have a look at his earlier stats. 56. Okay, cool. So I think, look, he's average, like he's priced around the early 50s. I can see him quite comfortably at least getting a handful of points above that. But maybe I'm biased. Maybe he's not as much of an auto pick as I thought he was. I'll leave that up to you guys. If your risk appetite is high and you're keen for a roller coaster, get on the David Fafita train. And the other one that I was looking at, Aaron Clark. So he's a really interesting one. I think again, if I look at the stats, he might not be such a standout. But he moved from hooker to lock last year. He had really good stats. So looking at 2022. So obviously, as you can see, he played most of his career at hooker. And then we should go two positions at once. But if I look at the lock position, so he averaged 51, which is 10 points higher. Then to be honest, that it's a 3-game sample size, and there's a 76 in 52 minutes, in 58 minutes, sorry, as a part of that. But just if you look at those stats, like 30 tackles, 100 meters gained, that's 40 right there just in base. And he obviously had some pretty sort of like a lot of tackle breaks and stuff. But look, that's just 3. That is only 3 games. And then he had that other one off the interchange. All right, maybe the numbers so don't support me as much as I wanted because sample size is low. But essentially, late in the season, he went into lock. Tino started playing at prop, and they just both had really good stats. They did play some weaker teams, to be fair. So maybe it's a little bit more risky than I thought. But I think for draft, if you've got Aaron Clark on the waiver wire, pick him up. I think it'd be great. He should be dual position, hooker and lock or sort of middle front row forward, in fantasy. And I'd love him as a dual position player who I think will sort of average in the mid to late 40s, which I think is a conservative sort of estimate given his form towards the end of the season. The Dragons, I won't spend too much time on. I don't think they'll do very well this year. Don't have a lot of upside. Lomax would be good as a draft pick, but obviously everyone would have pretty much done their draft already. Sloan, I would stay the hell away. Low work rate, likely to play in a poor team this year. BMM, I'd stay the hell away. Bird comes back in. Burns could take that. There's a couple of guys that would compete with him for edge minutes. He's on the wrong side of 30. He might even be 32, 33. So obviously a big dude. Don't see him playing 60 to 8. I've got 60 minutes, but that's like the most that he's going to play. And he's probably only going to play that for round 2 or 3 until whenever Bird's back. So I'd stay the hell away from him. And that's pretty much it for the Dragons. So that's the end of the sort of game by game fantasy and super coach preview. As you can see on our Linktree, we're going to have a lot more to add on here. So if you check this out on Thursday, the 2nd of March, obviously day 1 of the NRL season, there'll be a few more links on here. But I wanted to start off with going through the teams, going through the minutes and sort of like fantasy and super coach guys to look at. I'll very quickly go through like the fantasy sort of popular or some of the popular players, what I think about them. I'll do a very quick run through in Supercoach and then finish off with Draftstars. So if I look at fantasy, Brandon Smith, I actually didn't realize why he was so highly owned. And then I played around with some numbers and realized, yeah, shit, okay, he's going to be the number 1 hooker for the Roosters, and he's going to get that sort of like 70 plus minutes or 70-ish minutes on average. And it actually is a really good buy in both Supercoach and in fantasy. Alamotti, dog center, lock him in, don't think twice. Cleary is a really interesting one. He's obviously even higher now. As you can see, he's jumped up 8%. Also another plug, footystatistics.com, awesome site. But yeah, Cleary is obviously jumping up even more so because of Hines being injured, and essentially people are taking Hines out and putting Cleary in. I think this is going to sound a little bit silly, and I think unfortunately I've just brought Cleary into my fantasy team, but I think there's a real opportunity in fantasy and in Supercoach if you can make like your team work in this way to leave Cleary out. And I think leaving Cleary out only because if you look at how they went last year, if you look at NRL, so obviously I'm using NRL Fantasy as a guide here, but if you look at the guys averaging 60 and above, Grant, Ice Papali, Munster, Cleary, Murray, Cook, Hines. Hines is injured, so obviously let's ignore him for now. Cook and Murray, you can pick either of these guys, and they'll be in your team from now until Origin, and you won't have to touch them. They play every single week. Munster for the Storm, I can't imagine he'd be too much different from his average last season. Papali, he has gone to the Tigers from the Eels, so most people are expecting a drop off, and he's not very popular, so I can understand ignoring him. And Grant obviously is the sole hooker. There might be a slight uptick in his numbers. So Cleary's essentially not that obvious guy that you have to have. It just so happens that he is in the halves with Hines out for a lot of people. So I think in Supercoach, it's kind of tricky with only the two halfback spots. Kind of makes it awkward. You have to rejig your whole team. But I think in fantasy, there's a real opportunity for you to sort of rejig your team, leave Cleary out, and then you've got Murray or Cook, or Murray and Cook from the Rabbitohs, Munster and Grant from the Storm. Whoever you feel comfortable captaining. Personally, I'd be going Murray in that scenario if you're doing that. There's a real opportunity to go bang. I'm going to leave Nathan Cleary out. See how he goes the first 3 weeks. And if he's making me really regret that, he's got to buy in round 4, I think it is from memory. And then yeah, unfortunately, you would have to bring him in after that. If you're having to go risky, that's a ploy you could go. Katoa is the Dolphins rookie in the halves. He won that spot over Milford. Again, a super popular player that if you can find other cheapies that are that you like just as much as him, I'd be looking to leave him out. And if you do have him, do not play him in your 17. I think he could really struggle, especially early on. Hopgood, don't think twice, has the lock roll for the Eels, has that for at least 3 weeks. Even when Matto's back, you should get some decent minutes, excellently priced in both fantasy and fantasy and Supercoach. Definitely pick him. Cam Pereira, again, another one that I think you could potentially leave out, considering Brian Kelly's going to come back, and it's the Titans. If they have crap start to the season, a rookie winger could definitely be left out. Warbrick, Storm winger, really good job security. I'd be picking him. Tabia Fido, similar to Sloan and Terrell Sloan, fullback, not much work rate, playing in. Actually, sorry, he's not playing there. Oh, sorry, he is. Getting confused. I thought he was playing for the Cowboys still, but yeah, playing in a weak team and not much work rate. I'd be looking to leave him out if you can. I haven't picked him in any of my teams. Carrigan, great stats last year. I'd be picking him. Miller, 50-50 on him. If you've got the money, if you want to pick him, wouldn't talk you out of it. Teddy, I think, you could go with the tactic of getting him in first 2 weeks, see how you go. And then potentially, I know the other one is Trebojevic has a buy round 2. Teddy has a buy round 3. So what you could potentially do is pick Teddy for 2 weeks and flip him to Turbo in round 3. Stone, I'd be picking him in fantasy. Talau, I've said pick him, but yeah, at best he'd be a bench. He does have some low scores in him. Katoa, I think I picked him, but generally he's got a lot of potential and he's playing for the Storm. I think he's definitely a good pick. Tanner Boyd, goal kicking, got Titans half spot start season. They should be slightly better this year than they were last year. Don't see anything wrong. Very quickly, I think this will help us sort of catch up with some of the news. But yeah, he's got in the half spot. Oh, actually, I'm just repeating myself here. Jackson Ford, I would not be picking him. I'm very happy that people are picking him. That's like 6% of all coaches have recently brought him in. That's great. I'm more than happy to see that. As I said, the Warriors sort of like forward pack is a bit of a logjam scenario at the moment. I'd be leaving him out. Law, job security, Bateman to come in. I'm going to be leaving him out. Dory gets that spot for I don't think he's played a full NRL game, not got much upside, could potentially lose that spot with Lane and Maddo to come back in the next sort of 4 to 5 weeks. I'm going to be keeping him out of my team. Who do we have? Cardi, I've got him in both fantasy and Supercoach, I think. Like, job security is a risk, just like with Dury, but him, his pedigree in terms of stats, and I'd be picking him for sure. Turbo, he's going to play around to. I think I've left him out of both my fantasy and Supercoach team. I think you know what, this is actually worth looking at because I think he's got. What is it? I think he's got. Where is his fixtures? Well, I'll look at it here. So they've got the Dogs. There we go. NRL.com draw team Seagulls. Yep. Okay. So they've got the Dogs and then the bye. They've got Eels, Rabbitohs. All right, fine. Knights, Panthers, Storm. Okay, so the Knights is one game potentially a bottom 4 team, and the Dogs and the Seagulls I think would be around each other on the ladder. That and then around it with the Tigers. So that is a tough first 7 rounds, including a bye from Turbo, and we know how many injury issues he's had in the last 2 years. So I don't actually think about it in this much depth myself previously, but I'd almost definitely be leaving him out. See how he goes in the first sort of like 2 to 3 weeks. For whatever reason, if he gets back in 2021 form and he's bloody flying, sure, get him straight in. Might take you 1 or 2 games. Supercoach, you're not gonna lose anything until round 4 when he's finally going to be playing his 3rd game. And NRL Fantasy is not going to go that much up in price unless he's scoring bloody hundreds, which would really surprise me. Just like after such a long layoff with injury. And aside from that, nothing too special here. And in terms of guys going out, Hines, he's been left out for round 1, could be out for longer. Definitely leave him out. This guy, boom rookie for the Dolphins, but hasn't been named, so that makes sense. Walsh not named for round 1. Manu, the same news. Howarth, he's a highly regarded Storm player. I think he's been signed up for 5 years for a lot of money, but he's not made the round 1 team, so it makes sense to not have him in. Stone is really interesting. Like, people have just thought, oh, he's on the bench, so they haven't picked him. But I think 257k in NRL Fantasy, I don't care. I'd still be picking him. I think it'd be a really good long burn cheapie. Schuster, he'll be back most likely round 3. I think it's fine, especially in NRL Fantasy, not to pick him and just wait and see how he goes in the halves. Sloan, I don't think you should pick him, and I totally agree with this. That's fine. I might leave NRL Fantasy there for now. Supercoach, this has run on a lot longer than I thought, so I might do this really quickly, but I'll go position by position and just look at the most highly owned guys. As you can see, I forgot how I just got rid of, but I think I had Smith and Boyd. So I think I had Smith and Boyd. I think Smith, definite upside in terms of stats for him. Boyd, goal kicking, I think he'll be an interesting option, and I'd rather go him than someone like Stone, Hodgson, or Kenny, which I think all have less upside. Grant, I've chosen Smith instead of him, essentially save money in the hooking spot. Kepi, really like him as a cheapie, but let's just go into the ownership. I think if Stefano is the most owned front row forward, I'm almost like happy now that I've left him out. I think Kepi is definitely a better pick. Saves you for 45k, 17% less owned. And I don't think they'll do too differently in terms of they'll both get that around that sort of 35-minute mark, with Kepi the potential to actually play more minutes, being named at lock, whereas Stefano's got so many big minute middles around him. So I think, the more I sort of think about it, Kepi I really like. I've gone nuts with my front row forwards or front rowers in Supercoach, Tapine, Haas, Tino. I'm so bloody keen to watch these guys play. This is going to be a really fun season to watch all these. And I've got Carrigan, Fafita, Olakwatu. So obviously I've spent a lot of money here. Oh crap, I'm clearing. It's noticeable how much more you can spend on your guys in Supercoach compared to fantasy. But I'd be leaving Stefano out as a bit of a point play there. No one else really. I would not be picking Moale. He's going to get 20 to 30 minutes. He might be a slow burn Kashi, but then there's Sele and there's Havila to come back. I don't think that's a good pick at all. Pele, the dogs are screwed in the middle, so I don't actually mind that. I think he'll also be slow burn, but there's at least like an opportunity for him because someone has to play minutes there. Um, second row, love Cardi. Hopgood, got to pick him. Murray, can understand why he's so popular. Schuster, I don't understand why 34% of people have him. Maybe it's just because it takes up a cheapy spot and you know he's got that 5-8 spot locked down. Fair enough. Blore, I'd be staying away from, as I've already mentioned. Katoa, I really like. Fafita, I really like with his upside. You can see I've got Trindle here. I think that's because I brought it. I realized I could afford Cleary, and I thought I just wanted to see how my team looked with Trindle. I think it's really risky in Supercoach. You'd almost like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to keep my team this way. But you know, if you sort of run out of money, you've got Trindle and Katoa as options in the halves. This could really stuff my team. I wouldn't recommend doing this. So in terms of halfback ownership wise, you can understand why Clear is so popular again because Hines obviously is not named round one. Katoa, I don't love him in the team. I almost think that I might rejig my team eventually to have sort of to not have Boyd at hooker, have him in the halves or have him in halfback, sorry. Um and kind of get Katoa the hell out of there, but we'll see. Sam Walker, I think, is a really interesting option. Again, that option I mentioned before around putting Walker in your team for the first couple of rounds while they've got the Dolphins and the Warriors. And then whoever they've got round 3, and then get Cleary in for him after that. Obviously, I'd have to rejig my team to do that. Hines, do not pick him. Can't pick someone at 900k that could be out or is out for 1 week, could be out for a few weeks. Cooper Johns most likely only gets a week, maybe 2, won't even get a price rise, and 340k is not like his bargain basement. That's silly. Moses could be interesting at that ownership percentage, but I probably would not be touching him. 5'8". Or Burden Dway is interesting. I've gone all in on Dway here, and Burden I've only left out just because I got a cheapie in, but I don't think you could go wrong with either of these two. Both teams on the rise, both players on the rise, both goal kickers. I think they'd both be fine. Ponga's really interesting. Got a relatively good draw at the start of the season. The Knights team looks slightly better than it did last season, even though they've lost Clemmer in the pack. I don't think Ponga's a bad option at all. Drew Hutchison on the bench, don't pick him. Winger fullback. I've got obviously a bunch of rookies. I'm only named these guys because Tigers and Titans are playing each other. They'll have a high scoring game, you would think, and that's why I've got these guys in there. Whereas the Panthers play the Broncos. I'm not too confident with Taruva. Alamoti's against Manly, and I love Hunt on the left edge for the Knights. Up against, well, that's it, against the Warriors, but he's on the left edge for the Knights, which is like the more popular edge. Guys like Edric Lee, for example, has got a lot of tries on that left edge in previous seasons. Don't repeat myself here, but yeah, these guys are obviously all cheapies, nothing against them. Love Val Holmes with that sort of relatively soft belly draw. Would be staying away from Tabio Fido. Love Toa as well, considering that he's apparently going to go back onto the left edge. Fullback, this should be interesting. As I've just said, I've realized I'm now super confident with keeping Trebojevic out of my team in both Supercoach and Fantasy. Teddy and Taruva definitely recommend having them. And I don't see anything surprising. I don't know why you would. I don't know why you'd pick Ruben Garrick, considering he's going to be on the wing. He's priced so high. There's just no reason to pick him, I reckon. So that's Supercoach. Final thing, if you haven't heard of Draftstars, so they're a fantasy platform, just like Fantasy and Supercoach. Although you can play free contests, but predominantly they exist as a platform where you can enter in money and play fantasy sports. So, like for example, it's also called daily fantasy sport because you can literally put in a team for one game or a slate, which is like the games on that day for the NRL. And obviously they've got other sports like AFL, which is their biggest sport, NBA, cricket, etc. But if I get into tomorrow's contest, sorry, when I say tomorrow, I'm doing this on Wednesday, so obviously this is the first game of the NRL. Thursday night, $50,000 prize pool. So that's the minimum prize pool. It can go more than that if they get more entries. And you can enter multiple teams. So this is the main contest where every team costs you $15, and there's people out there that do actually max enter. But obviously, if you're playing for fun, there's a whole bunch of other options where I've got a filter on at the moment, but you can play like much less of an entry fee, and you can see all these different contests open up. So have a look around if you're interested. We've got links if you're keen to sign up. But if you get in there, you can break it down to outside backs, halves and hookers, forwards, and then you've got one position where you can pick from any position that you want. So if I just make a bit of a dummy team, like Meanie and say, for example, like Gutho, both fullbacks, I reckon they'll do well. I usually start, this isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but I usually start with the forward packs and see who's cheap and should it be. So like a Cardi, he's got big upside. Hopgood. If you play fantasy and Supercoach, you kind of already know where to look at. Katoa, for example, they're 3 good value back rowers. And then your halves and hookers. I think this will be a grindy game. So I want to go a hooker, and I'll go Hodgson just to save myself a bit of money. And then I've got a lot of money left to go pick a player in any position, and I'm going to go RCG just because the Eels pack, and I reckon he'll have to play pretty big minutes. Got a little bit of cash left over, but I'm happy with that. And then bang, submit lineup. That's how you do that. Our company, Wiki, we work with Draftstars to provide content, but to also provide a data tool where it actually helps you make your teams. So this is every player in the Eels and Storm game. We tell you who's good value. Obviously, if they're green, they're good value. That's simply just looking at the fantasy score that we predict before the game compared to the price. So you can see there, Cardi, he's cheap. We reckon he'll get around early 40s. They use NRL.com data, and their pricing, their scoring system's pretty similar to NRL Fantasy, by the way. So if someone scores 43 in Draftstars, they're going to be pretty much around that in NRL Fantasy. So if you're a Supercoach player, it'll take a little bit of time to get used to. But if you're an NRL Fantasy player, it's not too different at all. But that pretty much does it, guys. Look, there's a lot that's gone into preparing from round one from our company's point of view. We're kind of going all in on the NRL this year in terms of what we're looking to do. So as you can see here, we've got private Discord. It's free to join. I think we've got almost 300 people in there. A lot of them are sort of NRL Fantasy, Supercoach, Draftstars, and punting people so far. So that would be awesome. If you're keen, join that. It's free to join. We do a weekly newsletter. Feel free to sort of join that as well. If you're keen to play Draftstars, you can do that. All these links will be wherever we put this link out to, but our Linktree has everything. The video that I'm doing now and the punting one that I'll do tomorrow will be on here as well. We've got open leagues. We've got $500 for, you can join for free, but we've got $500 worth of prizes for Supercoach and for NRL Fantasy total. So you can check that out. And then we'll have a whole bunch of data tools like the NRL Stats Bible, our odds comparison tool, which I'll go through in our punting video. And obviously it'd be awesome if you could follow and like and all that kind of stuff on socials from our Linktree. But aside from that, obviously if you're checking this out on Wednesday, we'll be back with our punting video on Thursday. We'll have a whole bunch of stuff, including team previews on the website wiki.ai. And obviously if you tag along to our socials or our Discord, you'll get a whole bunch of messages from us and the crew in Discord, chatting all things rugby league over the next few months. So this went on way longer than I thought it would. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about before round one, but I think from next week, we'll start actually sort of getting you guys to ask some questions about your teams and certain players, and we can go into more detail about what you actually want to hear about, rather than me sort of rambling through about which side of the field certain guys play and how many minutes the forward pack and all that kind of stuff. And I'll also put this spreadsheet out there to share it with you guys in read format, so you can let me know if I've gotten anything wrong, and we can change stuff week to week. Anyways, guys, Nicole from Wiki, I'm out for now. I will catch you guys on Discord and socials in the next couple of days. Very much looking forward to the first game of the NRL season. Enjoy.